Good to have you on Benchmark, Your Excellency. You have been in Sri Lanka now for a few weeks. What are your first impressions of our country?
Well, I've had a fascinating time here in my first few weeks. The first thing I've noticed is the warmth of people. I've received a very good welcome here. I've also had lots of questions about the United Kingdom as I've been asking questions about Sri Lanka, which means there's a strong mutual interest on which I can work. In Colombo, I've been very struck by the obvious signs of growth, commercial growth going on within this city. And I also was able to visit Jaffna in my early few weeks, and I could see there both the progress that's been made and some of the challenges that remain. And I suppose my other first impression has been the huge enthusiasm for cricket here during the Cricket World Cup, and let me offer my warm congratulations to Sri Lanka on their win.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now, you hail from Scotland, but you were Deputy Head of Mission in Ireland, and now you are here as Head of Mission for the UK here in Sri Lanka. What lessons do you feel are there from your country's post-IRA era for us, as well as others who are going through or who have been through similar experiences?
The first lesson I learned was the devastating effect that terrorism can have on the lives of ordinary people. And I have no regrets of the defeat of terrorism in this country from that perspective as well. The other thing I learned in Northern Ireland was the building blocks we put in place to develop a sustainable peace there. Bringing communities together, understanding their concerns, trying to identify their shared interests, producing devolved government in Northern Ireland, and creating an economy in which all people, including young people, had a stake, which has helped to further break the cycle of violence. No two situations are the same, and you certainly can't sort of transplant one experience in one country, lock, stock and barrel into another, but I know a number of governments have looked at our experience in Northern Ireland and seen which techniques were helpful there.
Are there lessons for powerful nations and coalitions alike that continue to fight a war on terrorism from Sri Lanka's successful defeat of terrorism?
Well, precisely as I said, I think that there's always things to be learned from individual countries' experience. I don't think you can take one model and apply it necessarily in any other country. But the history of the conflict here in Sri Lanka and the way it was dealt with here and the way the future is being built here, I'm sure that other governments, including my own, will continue to look at with interest.
So back at home, Your Excellency, how do you assess relations between Sri Lanka and UK at this particular time?
The overall relationship remains strong. We've got strong historic links, our shared history, our shared links in the Commonwealth of Nations. We've got strong trade and investment links, we've got strong education links, we've got strong cultural links. But we've also had our challenges, and it's no secret that we've had our differences in some recent months. My job as a diplomat, though, is to put those differences behind us, find the areas where we can make common progress and common cause, and I'm sure I'll find them in taking my work forward here.
Speaking of challenges, the so-called Oxford fiasco, is it a thing of the past or is it water under the bridge? Do we move on from here? And for the record, what is your government's official take on this?
Our official take and our true take is that this was a private visit organised by the Oxford Union in conjunction with Sri Lankan officials. The Foreign Office wasn't involved in the planning of that visit in any way. We were always ready to provide adequate security for the President, as we would for any other head of state, but the decision to cancel the speech was one taken by the Oxford Union, not by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. What
on earth is going on in the Middle East, and especially Libya?
We are living through a real period of turmoil in a number of countries in the Middle East. The one common factor of those countries is that each of them has had the same single leader for over 30 years without any change. British government is concerned about the violence occurring in each of those countries, is concerned about preserving the right to peaceful protest, and concerned about the safety of civilians, and we've called for each of those governments to protect the civilians within their countries. There's a qualitative difference in what's happening in Libya, and that is that the head of government in that country has declared war against a whole swathe of his population, threatening to brutalize and massacre them. In Libya, the Arab League states came together to call for a no-fly zone. The UN Security Council has passed a resolution authorising action to be taken to protect the civilians in that country. That's our overriding priority, and that's what we're doing there.
Well, there is criticism that the West has one set of rules for the likes of Libya and another for the Bahrains of this world. What is your take on this?
My opinion is twofold. First of all, in Bahrain as well as in Libya, we've called for protection of civilians and respect for their rights. The difference is one of scale. I don't think the two situations are directly comparable in that respect. And the difference also is in terms of the authorization which the United Nations has given there. We have prevented a massacre of perhaps the whole population of Benghazi, and I make no apology for that.
Turning the clock back to Egypt's relatively bloodless revolution, what lessons are there for the world at large, for heads of state, for diplomats, and also the United Nations?
First lesson, perhaps, is that when the winds of change come, they can come very quickly. I first saw this when I was a young diplomat dealing with issues in Central Europe. When I joined the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office, the Berlin Wall still stood, and much of Central and Eastern Europe was under the Soviet yoke. And yet in a very short period in the late 1980s, the Berlin Wall fell, and the demand for a say in government and the demand for more freedom led to a collapse of the Soviet Empire and new democratic governments springing up in those countries. Something similar seems to me to be going on in Egypt and in other countries in the Middle East at this stage. We're in a state of flux, we're in a state of uncertainty, and I'm not sure that I can predict the exact outcome. But I think the lesson to be learned is that the most stable societies are stables which are pluralistic societies, in which ordinary people have a voice in the way that things are run. And I hope we'll move to a situation where more countries will recognise the stability in that pluralism.
The UK is one of our largest trading partners. It's also one of our largest foreign investors. How do you view bilateral trade between our two countries?
The overall bilateral trade relationship is very strong. The United Kingdom is the second largest direct investor in Sri Lanka. In 2009, some $300 million of investment from UK companies into this country. We're also your second largest bilateral trade partner in terms of volume. Sri Lanka exports around $1 billion of worth of goods to the UK each year, and in return imports about $186 million of goods into this country. So that's a pretty good base from which to be working, and I hope in my time here to increase those figures even further.
So what scope is there for acceleration, for bettering trade relations, for actual expansion? In what areas do you think you will see that?
For both the United Kingdom and Sri Lanka, the way to maintain and increase opportunities is by having open markets. Markets which gives incentive to business to come into a country and to grow and develop, and transparent regulation to give certainty for businesses. That's certainly what businesses tell me in any country in which they're seeking to invest, and I'm sure the same is true here.
Your Excellency, what part does English language play in this regard? Can we continue with the competitive edge that we've always had, or are there other competing nations overtaking us?
English language is clearly an advantage, not just in the business world, but more widely in this increasingly interconnected international community. The first advantage Sri Lanka actually has, it seems to me, is in having such a high general literacy rate between 92 and 93%, which is the highest in South Asia and one of the highest in Asia as a whole. You then combine that with a number of people who can speak English, and it seems to me there's still an advantage for Sri Lanka there as well. Big demand for English language teaching, which is provided by our partners at the British Council here in Sri Lanka. British Council Library in Sri Lanka, Colombo and Kandy behind, has 24,000 subscribers. That's the biggest number of subscribers of any British Council library in the whole of the world. Absolutely. 12,000 students going through the English language courses at the British Council each year, and 2,000 English language teachers getting training at the British Council each year, so they can then go back to their schools and the communities and the villages to teach English language to their students. It's a very competitive field, and other countries are catching up as well, but it seems to me from those sort of figures, people in Sri Lanka remain determined to try to keep that comparative advantage.
Speaking of languages, your High Commission recently launched the Sinhala and Tamil website. It is a very novel concept, and how do you hope to benefit from this?
It may be novel, but seems to me to be plain common sense. Our job is to provide information about the United Kingdom and about the services we provide as a High Commission to people here in Sri Lanka. Obviously, we reach out to a good number of them through our English language website, but we also want to reach out to those whose first language or only language is Sinhala or Tamil. So I was delighted with the launch of that website soon after I arrived here. It's also, I think, significant that we're doing this through our website because, of course, young people in particular now operate through that form of technology, and internet usage is going up in this country. And as well as the website, we're also increasingly trying to communicate through Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Flickr as well. And we're getting a lot of hits through that form of communication. So I hope we can continue with that. I should say that I also hope, while I'm here, to at least learn a little bit of Sinhala and Tamil for myself, so that I can increase my communication as I go around the country.